Hello, everybody. This is Constance from Mysterious Galaxy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am really excited because we are kicking off the week with a great event. We have Rachel Mans McKenny with us, joined by Premee Mohamed, and I'm super excited. So Rachel's book, The Butterfly Effect, is something as an introvert I can relate to. I like animals way more than people. I think a lot of people can relate to me on that. And essentially, we have a character who gets a really cool internship job in the rainforest, but as things are wont to do in books, she is pulled back and has to leave that and then go on an adventure of self-discovery and relationship and many a good thing. And I'm not going to give away too much because then, come on, you got to read the book. And then for Premee's book, it is a really cool mashup where it is Beneath the Rising, and essentially they come up with a way to get rid of fossil fuel, but the really cool twist, and I'm allowed to say the twist because it's in the summary of the book, so you can't say it's a spoiler, but then ancient ones are awakened and they want to subject humanity to their awesome ancient powers, and thus the story truly begins and kicks off because humanity and the main character, of course, does not wish to be subjugated to ancient, powerful beings. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to both of these awesome, awesome authors. But before I do the Vanna White section very, very quickly, as many of you will know, we have our chat section to what I believe is the right-hand section for most people. Please engage in the chat. And then if you have questions, though, and that is the best part of an event, is that you get to ask the authors questions. If you look down below, it'll say ask a question. And where it says ask a question, that is indeed the button you click, and you can then ask a question. And shameless plug, because I am a bookseller, the best way to support these authors is to buy the book. And you can even get a book plate with it. And they're just such great reads. Why wouldn't you want to do it? So if you look down below, they will say buy book and personalized book plate, and that link will take you to their books. I will see you guys at the end of the event, and have a good one. Bye!
Thank you.
All right. Well, now Premee and I have known each other for several years now. This is our first time actually talking in real life, however. And if you follow Premee on Twitter, which I don't know why you wouldn't, you would know that she's obsessed with Beatles. And I thought that we'd start off the evening with sort of a silly game just to get each other engaged and to get you as an audience engaged a little bit in the chat. So I was going to share my screen, but it's a little bit wonky. So I get to show you my fantastic PowerPoint that I made on my phone instead to play along. So here's our little first slide here. It's just the intro. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about bugs because my book has to do with bugs. Premee loves insects as well. We're going to talk about science. We're going to talk about real life of scientists, which Premee knows about. But let's talk a little bit about Santa Mantis first. All right, so 'tis the season. We've got naughty and nice insects going on here. I'm going to show you some silly pictures of insects coming up. And I want you to write in the chat as an audience member if you think that they've been naughty or nice this year, and Premee and I will decide why that is. So you give us the reasons why. We will give you the reasons why we think that we agree with you as far as the naughty or nice thing goes. Now, I had to pick Santa Mantis, but there were lots of other good runners-up for insects here. So have to think about it as a timely thing. Okay, here's our first little beetle friend. All right, this lovely beetle here. You can type in the chat. Whoever gets there first gets to decide if this little beetle was naughty or nice this year. Oh, it was naughty. Okay, so Premee.
Clearly not.
You don't think it's been naughty?
I don't think it's been naughty.
I think it stole all of the blue pigment from some other creature. It surely couldn't be that naturally blue.
I am pretty sure it went to a licensed car repair shop and got that paint job legally.
Okay, you're right. Supporting the local economy.
Yeah.
I think we might have to support that beetle here on their choice. They are a good citizen of the world. All right.
Yeah.
Got our next friend here. Not a beetle, but an insect. Definite wings. Who's going to decide whether this thing is naughty or nice this year? And don't try and tell us it's a murder hornet, because nice costume. Yes. Okay. So it's dressed up. Maybe it's not actually.
It's a bug in disguise as another bug. I'll accept
There you
that.
go. Yeah. There you go. So that must be nice. Dressed up is nice, at least. All right. Yeah. It's ready for a ball. Yeah, excellent. I just thought some of these were so interesting. And one of the things that Premee often does on hers is just quote tweet some interesting pictures. And I know a lot of people are just nervous or scared by insects. And I think the more that you read about them, yeah, exactly. These bugs have not been, these bugs are pretty busy. They have circled around. But I think that the more that you read about insects and learn about them, the less nerve-wracking and scary that they become. So I know Premee has a training in science. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and your day job?
Sure. Yeah, I can. Well, those are two different things, actually. But my background started off in molecular genetics, and then from there I hopped over to soil science and ended up with a degree in environmental science. And so my current job is in environmental policy at the province level, but I've also done research. I've also done consulting. I've worked in heavy industry. There's a lot of places you can put a scientist or employ a scientist if you don't really care whether the scientist survives the day or not. Yeah.
For my book, I talked to quite a few entomologists, and it's amazing to see where entomologists are and the kinds of fields that they go into. Some of them even work for Hollywood doing bug wrangling on Hollywood sets, which I can only imagine, the kind of craziness. A lot of people picture the kind of work that my narrator's doing at the beginning of the book, where it's hands and knees field work. But a lot of the time, when I was following around people in more of a lab environment, a lot of it's just cleaning stuff. I mean, I don't think a lot of people understand what science environments often are. So when you read a book that focuses on a scientist, or, watch a movie that has that kind of character, what are some of the things that bug you the most?
Oh my God. And I was going to ask you this later too, so maybe we can hang on to this one. Was what kind of research did you do for your book?
Yeah.
That sounds really fun, talking to those people. But the first thing that always comes to mind is the idea of the lone genius. That is practically never the case. And even people that look at the Nobel Awards and stuff, they're like, we're giving this prize to these two guys or whatever. But really, it's a lab of like 74 people, and they all contributed. So there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of coordination. You're always working with someone. You're never alone, and you never come up with what you're coming up with alone. And the second is, as you mentioned, you spend a lot of your time cleaning or yelling at people to clean something, or crying into a lint-free shop towel, or just doing drudgery. Like when I used to work in a combined cancer and hepatitis lab, and my friends would be like, oh my God, a cancer lab, that's so cool. I'm like, yeah, because I spent 10 hours today hunched over a microscope with a clicker, counting skin cells. And at the end of the day, your thumb muscles are just like a squash ball, just because you're sitting there for 10 hours going click, 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 click. And people are like, that's science? That's so depressing. I'm like, yeah, a little bit.
It's not all flashy. I mean, let's talk. The main character in your book obviously gets to do a lot of the flashy stuff. You've got Johnny here, who's an inventor. And as Constance mentioned in the opening, she's solved the problem of fossil fuels. There's all kinds of wonderful things that have happened. But she does, I don't know. You wouldn't call her a lone genius, though, would you? She has some lone wolf tendencies.
Yes, because she's kind of a goblin. But you know what she was really was, I was writing the book during my first undergrad. I finished the year I graduated, and I was about 20. And A, at that age, you haven't got any discretion in the characters you're making. But B, I think she was really some kind of wish fulfillment. Yeah, as an undergrad, I kept thinking, what if these people stopped limiting us and let us do real science? And first of all, if you do that, all the undergrads will die. Nobody will graduate. I myself was the cause for having the East Chemistry building evacuated once. And but I just thought, if you took away all those very good, reasonable limitations on a scientist, even a very bright one, you might find out later that maybe there was a reason some of those limits are on there. Things like peer review and bioethics committees and things like that.
Yeah, sometimes it's good to have that team around you, since they're the ones who can hold you back and say, hey, have you actually, given a second thought to that here?
Yeah.
Well, and where she's pretty reckless. I mean, she's an absolute genius, but Nick, on the other hand, who's the other character of the book, I mean, they're just a pair of opposites here, and they've been best friends since childhood. You find out a lot more about the history of their relationship, and the whys in this book. I cannot wait for book 2, by the way, just zooming ahead. Anyway, he kind of has to step in and play some of those roles, but he's not really a scientist.
Yeah, it was fun writing opposites, and I tend to think books where characters appear similar on some level but are very, very different on every other level often have the best kind of character interplay.
So in my book, the two main characters they're twins. And as is the case with many twins, they're very, very different. So my main character is very grumpy, and she is a scientist, and she's more literal minded, and she doesn't try to soothe people's feelings. And the boy twin, the male twin, he's more of a people pleaser, and he plays music, and he's more touchy feely, and he's very into relationships, and he's sort of a romantic. And so, it's fun to see them play off each other and how their relationship works. Especially when he loses some of that romanticism and optimism as he goes through a health crisis. So as you say, it's finding those moments of like what they have in common that maybe they didn't know that they had in common earlier on. It's definitely really interesting.
Well, yeah, and as twins too, I'd be curious to see how the relationship progresses in the book. Presumably they haven't got the same relationship as they did as children. How do you think it changed, and why do you think it changed?
So I'd say that a lot of it is the way that the rest of the family relationships shake out. So the way that the father has passed away, and then the mother is estranged, but she comes back into the picture in the novel. And so it's maneuvering around these experiences and sort of making up for this missing person who was there, and trying to also, you said you have siblings, getting to know each other as adults truly is such a huge part of being an adult sibling, coming to terms with that. My brother is 12 years older than I am. He's a particle physicist. He works at CERN part-time, and he's one of those people whose brain just works completely differently than mine. And it was definitely an inspiration for thinking about how science works in a book, just to see someone who can look at the finer details so clearly and not be so emotional about a failed experiment, where I'd be like, oh, like when you write a page and you have to delete half of it, it's kind of like, oh, what a waste, So it's fun to play with those relationships on the page and think about how they are in your life as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think in real life too, some of us very, very detailed, focused people really desperately need our opposites around us who can help us see kind of the big picture. And I love both types of characters when I run across them in fiction, because I think that's so important for developing not just relationships, but also self-knowledge, as you say, because, your main character is finding out things she didn't know about herself.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about research. On my end, I wanted to know, your book is such an excellent book to read to escape, because it has so much traveling in it. It's sort of like a sci-fi Indiana Jones adventure. Like, it's just I loved it. And it was the absolute perfect thing to read during quarantine when you're just stuck at home. So how many of the places in the book have you traveled, or how did you do research on these places, which are literally all over the world?
Oh, yeah. No, it's funny that this doesn't come up. And I think people do think I have been to those places. And again, when I was writing this, I was 20. I hadn't... I'd been out of the country twice, once to the States, to Seattle, and once to South America with my mom. And that was it. And so all that's in there was just research. And, it was funny because, again, in 2002, when the book was finished, there wasn't there wasn't Twitter, there wasn't Facebook, there weren't even that many blogs, there wasn't Instagram. And I wanted photos of these places, and I wanted stories, and I would go to the library and be like, I want to know about places I haven't been, but I don't want like tourist books telling me where to stay.
Yes.
And I ended up with just these old like atlases and cookbooks and National Geographics, and where I could find them, people's blogs from the area showing me photographs and stuff. And it was really fun to kind of build up a mental picture of the places that the kids were traveling as they went along, because they're very aware that they're tourists there and that they don't know much about the area. So everything they're seeing is kind of new and fresh to them, even though they're moving at a breakneck pace.
Yes. Yes. I mean, you cover a lot of ground, and it's so interesting, just the little details in each place. But did you come up with a character relationship first, or did you come up with the plot first, or did it all kind of like, what's your process for writing a book like this?
Ooh, and again, this was 18-ish years ago that it was finished. Sorry. But I remember at the time I was noodling around the idea for a couple of years beforehand about the Johnny character. And I would like to apologize if the actual character I based her on is watching this or ever has been watching this. I stole her name and her looks wholesale from a girl I used to know called Johnny. And her real name was Joanna, and she went by John or Johnny. I've just been noodling around this idea of, of this prodigy who no one ever says no to, and who develops kind of the obvious attitude or personality or lack of personality that you get when no one says no. And and I didn't want her to be sole focus of the book. I wanted her to play off someone, but then of course you have to come up with a reason for her to play off somebody who seems ordinary or unusual. And that kind of, some of the problems in the book stem from the source of that relationship. And then I had to decide what I wanted to do with this character. Nothing good, I thought. So same question to you. Where did yours come from?
Yeah, well, mine firstly came from the place. So it's mostly set at a butterfly garden in the town nearby in Ames. So this is a very Midwest set book, Midwestern United States. And it's the largest butterfly conservatory at a university in the country, and it's just fantastic. And so I'm able to visit quite often, and I take my family, and I just walked around and I wondered, what would it be like to be able to work in a place like this? And, looking at the bug boards, which are sort of near the entrance, I was able to look at all these butterflies and all of their scientific names. And one of them was named Greta Otto. That's the scientific name for the glasswing butterfly. And I thought, that's an actual person's name. Like, that sounds like the person who would be working here. And so this is the first time in my life, I've written several novels, and this is the only one where the character's name came first. And then from there, I started to work out a lot of other questions or things I had been thinking about, like, what is it like to be Midwest nice? I wanted to write a character that just doesn't have to fit the same conventions that are so often seen around me. And I also wanted to think about the idea of, what is it like to caretake for a sibling? My brother died when I was really young, and I was so young that I wasn't able to help take care of him during his illness. And so I wondered, if that had happened when we were older, would I have been able to offer support? So I wanted to sort of take that and put it into fiction, completely different type of illness, different situation, different people, but think about those relationships and how you can work on that sibling bond with caretaking. Yeah, so that's where it came from.
And you mentioned you had done quite a bit of research with entomologists and stuff. Tell me what that was like.
Yeah, so it was, such a blast to be able to trail around. The curator of the butterfly house there let me follow him around and ask a zillion questions, and opened up the lab to me. I got to see what it looks like when they do specimen unpacks and hang them in their little, it's fantastic. It's so interesting, just things you never would have thought about before. But beyond that, I just got fascinated in studying entomology anyway. I mean, if you're a nerdy person doing the research, yeah, I know, who would that talk about? But if you're a nerdy person, doing the research for a book can just be all consuming. Like, you can take all of your time just falling into books. So I think that the acknowledgements in my book, like, most of it is like thanking people who will never read it because they don't know that I read their work for this, but books by lots of entomologists. And I had several who I was able to reach out and talk to a few about their careers and what it's like to do field work or what it's like to do other types of work. So that was really fun.
Oh, that's cool. Actually, and I'm going to ask you something that someone asked me the other day on Twitter, and I just kind of froze up. So I'm not saying we're nerds. I'm just saying maybe we know some nerdy people or writers or whatnot. But to research to the point where we kind of freeze up and aren't writing the fiction is really common. How do you come into the research when you're writing a book with like a plan to say, I'm going to start here and I'm going to stop here? Or do you just kind of let yourself go? How do you know when to stop and start research and when to move it into the fiction?
That's a great question. I never finished a first draft until I stopped doing research during the first draft. So my first drafts of novels are just lots of insert good stuff here, like insert facts here. And so that means I ultimately will have to rewrite major portions of books because I'm working off of assumptions, and that's fine. I go into it knowing that if I stop and try to dig into research in my first draft, it'll never get written. So then when I'm going back through and doing second, third, fourth drafts, I let myself fall down whatever wells I fall into. And what helps me avoid getting too deep in the weeds is reading a variety of types of, so for this, I read a mixture of more narrative types of explorations of like really approachable texts. And then I read a couple of less approachable texts. And I tried not to just keep it one type of entomology research. I wanted to see multiple experiences and voices and, you know, even eras just to see how it's changed a little bit.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, but that is a really good question because it's so easy to, well, and I wanted to ask, so your second book comes out in which month?
I've got 4 books coming out next year. So the first one is probably January, but the sequel to
the sequel to this
is March, I believe.
So did you write that sequel long ago, or was that a fresh project you were coming into 18 years later, picking up the plot, picking up the energy?
Boy. Yeah, and that actually was a whole thing I wasn't prepared for, I don't think. So the book was written when I was, graduating, and I kind of put it away because that's what I did with all my writing back then, is I'd write stuff and just kind of sit on it. And I wrote so that I would have something to read. I thought, publishing isn't for me. I'm going another way. So, I spent decades doing other stuff. And when my agent signed the book, of course, it was a standalone. I don't know how to write series. And at 20, I definitely didn't know how to write a series. So it was written as a standalone, pitched as a trilogy, and the publisher bought 2 books. And I kind of sat there like... My expression kind of has to be seen to be believed, but if people are just listening to the audio of this, trust me, I'm making a face. So I had to write the second book, and that was due this year, May 31st, in a pandemic with my brain working at about 12% capacity. So the first decision that had to be made was kind of, what am I going to do with this book? When I wrote the first book, I was basically peers with Nick and Johnny. Like, I started it when I was about 18. I was about Nick's age. And so they weren't, strange or unusual people to me, making strange or unusual decisions. They were saying things that me and my friends said. They were doing things that me and my friends would do. And, then you get to like 2020 and you're trying to write a sequel and you're like, you frickin' kids, go do your homework, go get a job, stop doing stupid stuff, make good decisions. And I'm like, okay, that is not the energy that I want for this book, but I don't know how to recapture it. And the truth is, I don't know that I did.
Well, we'll find out. I mean, so you decided to have it set out like right after, or is there a year break or 2 years, or?
There's a break, but they're not like my age.
Yes.
They're not me yelling for kids to get off the lawn, but I did think it was important that this idea that time heals all wounds. I didn't want the wounds to be healed, really. Mm-hmm. From the first book, I still wanted them to feel very raw, and for the pain to still be there. So I wanted it to be future, but not too future. Yeah. And that's a tough decision to make, because I've never written a book that comes after a book before. I wasn't sure how much to put in terms of explanation, explaining who people were, what relationships were, what, what the first book covered, what had happened, what people concluded, that kind of thing. So how much of the old stuff and how much of the new stuff? It's like sourdough starter. How much sourdough starter do I put into the new book to make it into bread?
But so hard. Yeah, I know.
So hard.
Everyone's like, "Are you gonna write, series?" I'm like, "No. Mm-mm. My people begin and they end. Like, this is so perfect. Like, I want something." I know.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, are you going to write more in your universe, in the Butterfly Effect universe?
No, all of the stuff I'm working on, I have a few projects which are pretty well complete, and they're completely different things. They're still in the contemporary fiction. One of them set in 1998, actually, which is like, oh, I love doing the research for that. That is fun. And I'm far enough into drafts for that where I can really sink down and be like, Beanie Babies, do you remember that? Like, and just like get into the weirdness. So
that was some of the research that I had to do for the sequel too, because for the first one, people were, contacting me and being like, wow, this feels so real. Like, it feels like it was written in 2002, like they're using Netscape Navigator and everything. And I was like, excuse me, I used to use Netscape Navigator. First of all, how dare you? Secondly, no, you didn't really have videos on the World Wide Web. Do you know how much data that would use?
Yeah, no, that would be impossible.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So people having like flash drives and stuff, or like, the discs or the diskettes. Like,
yep.
I was watching the first Mission Impossible movie the other day and looking at the technology, and I was like, ha ha ha, this is all ridiculous. I certainly didn't use any of that in 1996.
Oh my gosh. There's so much joy in that, though. It makes you feel like an ancient goblin, though. It's just like, oh my gosh. Well, and so you talk about, you keep referring to your characters as kids, and I'm like, they're 18. I teach at a college, and so I'm very used to addressing my students as young adults. They're adults.
Oh, young adults.
They're adults, right? So they'd be
at my age, I look at like an 18-year-old. I'm like, you're a baby. I go back sometimes to the university, from where I work. It's just across the river, so I go to borrow books or go to talks and stuff and watch the undergrads walking around, and I'm like, are you guys allowed to be here without your parents? I'm sorry, you all look so young. I'm twice as old as some of you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, well, we can just relish the fact that, I'm like, oh, I keep getting less connected. They definitely don't mistake me to be a student anymore.
No, me too. Yeah.
No,
now I'm like the wise campus crone. They're like, excuse me, miss, can you tell me where the humanities building is? I'm like, yes, child. And you will be Thane of Scotland next. Do not worry about it. It's over there. Just keep walking, turn left.
You need a couple other witches with you, though.
I know, I need some more witches.
Once you're not social distancing anymore, all your witches can come back together.
Yeah, otherwise we'll be like witches standing like 18 feet apart. They won't see us in the fog.
All right, well, let's look over and see what some of the questions are that people have in the chat. And people can keep asking, as we're talking a little bit. And Premee, there's one about Indian authors and what you think about sort of the future of authors maybe in like the science fiction sphere.
That's a really tough question. I think it's actually very difficult to generalize to any specific group of authors. You almost have to end up saying, what's the future of publishing or authors generally, especially with what we keep hearing about the publishing industry, with the big companies buying each other and developing monopolies, and independent bookstores and publishers going out of business. I think, sorry for a more general answer, I do think that publishing is getting better, and I think it's becoming more aware that there are good and important and talented stories to be told by people of marginalized identities, like Indian authors. And I think that editors are going to be more likely to start acquiring those types of stories from now on. And the pipeline, I think, is also opening up to allow more marginalized editors to get up into positions of power and acquisitions. So honestly, I do think the future is bright, and I think there's going to be less pigeonholing of marginalized authors.
Yeah. And they were asking about authors in the Midwest. And that's kind of it's sort of a different kind of counterpoint. I had an event last night that was focused on Midwest authors only. And part of that event was really demonstrating that people have a perception about what the Midwest really is, but there's many people of color in the Midwest. You know, there's lesbian, gay, transgender people in the Midwest, you know, and I think people, the more that they can see really what the Midwest is represented in books, I think the better off we are. I think we read so many books set in New York, and we read so many books set in California. And I think that the more that we can have a broader range of contemporary novels set in rural places, I think the better off we are. You know, it's not Little House on the Prairie. We have Thai food here. You know, it's that kind of thing. It's not shut off from everything. So I just think that the more you can have a broad variety of types of voices, the better, especially from, you know, historically underrepresented communities, more so for sure. All right. What was the hardest part of your book to write, or what part brought you the most joy, Premee? In this book or any of the books that you're working on right now?
Oh boy. Then in that case, I'm going to answer the book that I just finished editing, which is the sequel to Beneath the Rising. The ending was the hardest. Because it was one of those cases where, because of iffy outlining, I ended up at a point where two perfectly good endings both suggested themselves. And so a choice had to be made, and there's no one to help you make that choice if all the events of the story could go either way at a certain point. That took much longer than I would have liked to resolve, I think. And same question to you.
Yeah, I'd say all of it for me. The problem with this book is, so I originally started The Butterfly Effect in 2016, and it was in 3 perspectives. So I wrote it partially in Greta's perspective, the grumpy entomologist. It was partially in her brother's perspective, and it was partially in the brother's fiance's perspective. So it had 3 distinct voices. And when I showed it to my agent, she said, no, it's just Greta's story. And I said, but the love story, like the brother and the fiance, and she's like, no, it's really not their story. It's really about how Greta comes to term with this and how she stops burning all of the bridges that she's made. And so I had to rewrite the entire novel to be just from that one perspective. So rethinking the scenes that got to stay and leave, and how to see things from an outsider's perspective. And I actually thought it was a more interesting challenge to tell another person's love story from a third party perspective, like telling your brother's love story, you know, because you're watching it happen and unfold and still having that be part of the plot in a meaningful way. I thought that was kind of fun. And I'm not good at kissing scenes, so that allowed me to avoid most kissing scenes. Like, there's not a lot of kissing in my book, and a lot of it would just be like, you assume that they have fun kissing sometimes. Good for them. Like,
yeah, same here. And I'm going to preemptively answer the question too for all future books. It's like, love scenes. Yes, any love scenes would be the hardest to write. I don't know what they're doing. I hope they're having fun. Have at her.
I know. I'm like, what verbs do you even use? Like, is jiggle a good word? Like, is that a word that you... No, I'm just going to fade to black. I'm just...
Yeah.
It's just, I have so many friends who write contemporary romance, and I'm like, I don't know how you do it. I'm glad you do. I love reading it. I could never.
Yeah, I haven't got what it takes, I'm afraid. So I stick with the fields where I know I can semi-competently write a fight scene maybe, and probably not write a love scene.
So I like this question. Much of science fiction is really about technology, not science. Do you see your books as fighting against that stereotype? And if so, how?
Oh, that is such a good question. Sorry if you were going to answer that one first.
No, I don't have. No, that's you. That's an amazing question.
Oh, no, because that's absolutely correct. And what you used to see back in like the 40s, 50s, 60s, the golden age, I hope everyone's enjoying my air quotes, is gadget stories. So it's not even a story really. It's the protagonist comes in and either uses or explains a piece of technology, and often to his loyal assistant or maybe to his boss's lovely nubile daughter who has come in and needs an explanation or something. And then the story ends, and you're sitting there like, oh, come off it.
Yes.
But that used to be really common, is the writer would come up with this wonderful idea and throw a couple of characters at it. And what I hope is that that's becoming less common now, and that where interesting or non-existent or extrapolated from real technology is involved in science fiction, it's involved in a meaningful way in the plot, and it affects the choices of the characters and what they do and what they're reacting to and what the constraints are around the events. And again, I hope that part of that is spurred by writing sci-fi that has scientists in it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that those scientists will push back against the idea of that sort of historical gadget story. And just speaking as an associate editor at a sci-fi podcast, we get a lot of stories like that where people explain the faster to light drive and for like 3,000 words, and then they hit the end and you're like, okay. That was super interesting. It may even have been really well written. It's actually not a narrative.
Yeah. And
so
I think
what you want are humans, characters. So I hope that we're pushing away against that.
Yeah. The only thing I have to add to that at all is that in my book, the main character is obsessed with Star Trek. And that was one of the things I was delighted they let me keep. I was like, please let me keep all the Trekkie stuff. Please, 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 please. And they did. And it's mostly because there's so much interesting, people relationships in Star Trek, as well as the science of exploration. And I just think that's so lovely because you have to have that narrative here. It's never, most of it's not just gadget driven. I think you're right there too. So I was glad to be able to keep that.
Yeah. Well, and I feel also like they went out of their way in a lot of Star Trek episodes, at least, Next Generation and onwards, to make sure that when they featured the technology was part of the plot and affected what happened. So I really liked that. Like, this isn't just a transporter that we used to get around. The transporter can go wrong, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk about how you approach creating realistic regional dialogue and avoiding stereotypes? Do you use much regional dialogue in your text?
Not that I recall, and I generally try to stay away from it in my fiction, just because it's so easy to go wrong and not just be appropriative, but do it incorrectly. So you kind of, you insult the people that you're making fun of, but you also kind of play yourself. It's just humiliating. I don't think I'm at the skill level where I could do that competently.
Oh, it's a question for me.
Right.
I really try not to use much. I come from an English and theater background. So I did a lot of theater in high school and college and et cetera. And, when you read a script, very often it's not written in regional dialect. You just bring that to the character, knowing who the character is. And so I take the same approach to writing. If we know that they may be from the South, then you would just assume in your head as you're reading along, they might have a slight Southern accent, but I wouldn't feel comfortable writing it as dialect. I agree. It's definitely not a skill that I have either. And I think it's very hard to do that well. I think that's really difficult. Premee, how do you approach the speculative part of fiction? I always think of the way Margaret Atwood describes it as thinking through the possibilities of what's happening today a few years in the future. Is that how you think of it as well?
Pretty often, yeah. I write both sci-fi and fantasy, and I remember reading a while back supposedly someone saying the difference between fantasy and science fiction is fantasy includes speculative elements that couldn't happen, and sci-fi includes speculative elements that could happen. And I always really like how neatly that was tied up, because you could have an ultra fast spaceship, but you couldn't have a unicorn unless there's one right behind me. But a lot of it is looking at current technologies or trends and doing the extrapolation, I guess, sort of making the graph in my mind and saying, okay, if we go on this way, where does that line go? And the other thing, I guess, that's interesting too is doing that with an existing technology, but trying to probe into things like, well, how does it affect the people or populations or areas that aren't being written about or covered in media or things like that. So there's kind of two ways to go about it. Is like the technology itself becomes speculative, or its effects become speculative. And going back kind of to the primary research is always fun with that. You know, for instance, just recently studying 3D printers that can print living cells, which has been a possibility for a while, but now there's a new type of hyaluronic acid scaffolding that keeps the cells alive for like an hour. So you can print much, much bigger things than when the cells would die after 5 minutes, or else you had to rush them back into the growth medium, or little guys would die, right? And even just knowing that technology exists opens up so many fictional narratives for me, like as part of a short story, or as a scene in a novel, or as just something that could be done in the future. Like somebody blew up my liver. Well, that's okay. We've got an hour. We'll just print you a new liver. You know, that kind of thing.
How do you keep from falling down the rabbit hole of research? I mean, you could probably spend all of your time looking at things like that and really getting into what's going on in a way that's completely disconnected from your day job. So, you know, how do you keep keyed into what's interesting to you or could help drive your creativity without getting distracted? Or you don't?
All right. Well, I try. It's gotten a little bit easier now that I've started being more stringent about outlining. I used to be a diehard pantser, and then I realized that I was writing these like 300, 400,000 word things that didn't end, that people just went places and did things, and like they forgot what they were doing like 80,000 pages earlier or whatever. And like now with an outline though, what I kind of do is I try to figure out where I would need to research, and then I try to only research in those spots. And sometimes I'll find something that makes me change the outline, so I just like stop and go, okay, this actually is not possible, so maybe they need to make a different choice down here or something like that. And I try to keep it to kind of the minimum that I need to keep the narrative going, because the rabbit hole is deep and it's very tempting, and the fall into it is very slick and it's like muddy. But again, the other thing that helps, I think, is that now that I'm no longer so much writing as my fun little hobby, there are deadlines.
Yeah.
So the fear of researching until I don't have time to draft is also very motivating.
Yeah, 4 projects next year. My goodness. Premee, how do you sleep?
How that happens. I don't. I've stopped sleeping.
Yeah, I was going to ask. That's incredible. We had a question about, you know, what bug represents you and why? What do you connect with? I'm going to cheat on my answer because I didn't know that it was a possibility for the world of like having a pet. One of the things I found out when I was talking to some of the entomology graduate students is the idea of this tailless whip scorpion. And I became
yeah.
They're so cool. And I put one in the book. So like there's one in the book and he's fantastic. And his name's Gary, kind of like SpongeBob. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if I could convince my husband to allow for one, I would get him and he would be my friend.
So cool.
They're so cool.
So cool.
If you don't know what they look like, look them up. But if you're afraid of things that look like scorpions, I mean, don't, because they look kind of like a scorpion.
I've always wanted to, and this is going to sound terrible, and I'm sorry if this insults them, I've always wanted to smell them because apparently they're called Vinegar Runes.
Yes,
exactly.
And
they smell like vinegar. I remember seeing one at a lizard show or something. I ran over, I was like, oh my god, Amblipicidae, and the guy was like, you don't get out of the house much, do you? Leave me alone.
I love, if you just watch that 30 seconds of the interaction, I think you'd get the whole feel of this Zoomcast, honestly. You don't get out much, do you? But then just pure joy. I think
yeah. Well, you know, for this year, none of us have gotten out much. We're still okay, right?
Yes, totally. 100. We're almost okay. We're almost okay.
Totally okay. Mine, I think, Honestly, I hate to be the stereotype. I think it might be a dung beetle. Because I think they're cool little guys, and some of them are just gorgeously colored and iridescent, and they're so robust and sturdy looking, and they're one of those bugs where you look at them and you think to yourself, now this is an individual. You know, he has his own little life. He has his own goals. They look like idiots when they're walking backwards, rolling the dung ball, and you're like, you can't see where you're going, and they're like, this is fine. Backwards is fine. They also navigate using stars and the Earth's magnetic field, which is really cool. And multiple cultures across the world, not just the Egyptians, looked at them and decided to worship them or make them into deities or semi-deities, because they all universally decided that what the dung ball was the sun, and what the dung beetles were rolling was the sun across the sky. And you sit there like, why did you all come to this conclusion? And I guess people from China to Greece to Egypt to like South America all did roughly around the same time.
And like all we have done in Western society is come up with Fuller House. Like we
have positive qualities too.
We need to spend more time being introspective about insects, I think. I think that would solve a lot of issues.
I do understand why some people are afraid of them, because they're unpredictable, and it's nicer to, you know, encounter animals where you can kind of guess what they're going to do next, and they don't live in your house and might not maybe, you know, touch you. You know, it's the difference between seeing like a deer in the park and going, that's beautiful, and seeing a spider on your wall and going, okay, no.
Well, and part of my dare to myself was I was like, I am going to write a book club book that's going to make people think about bugs. And like, you know, I had several friends who were like, listen, I'm really scared of spiders. Like, there are no scary scenes with insects. Never once in this book are insects threatening or on someone's face without them being like, there's no situations like that. They're all just doing their thing like insects usually are. And they're just creatures and animals as well. And I think in talking to most entomologists, hearing them referred to time and time again as animals even helped flip the switch for me. Like, of course, they're animals, like they are. But then I think most often we just don't think of them that way. And that just helped me like get over any kinds of nerves around most of them. I mean, I still wouldn't like to see cockroaches around or anything. Yeah. Unless they're really cool hissing ones that are...
I like the hissing ones. And also there's someone on Twitter that I follow who has a colony of these emerald cockroaches. And I cannot even tell you how beautiful they are. Yeah. They're like this glossy metallic green, like they're covered in nail polish. But also the animals thing reminded me too, when I used to work at Agriculture Agri-Food Canada, we had a pet praying mantis that someone's kids had basically rejected for being a praying mantis, which, okay, legit. And, you know, people would come into the lab and be like, oh, what's its name? And we go, well, her name is Tina.
Right.
And just saying her and giving her a name, I think changed a lot of people's minds, and they would come by and say hi. And eventually we got a much more reliable food source for her from the pest lab upstairs. They were looking for ways to kill grasshoppers, so they would give us these bags of like baby grasshoppers, and we're like, well, there's one way. Here, Tina, eat it.
Well, and you know, one of the most interesting interviews I did was with Megan Ash, and she works mainly with wasps. And I had always been sort of like very pro-bee, but very nervous about wasps. And she's just like, wasps, like especially paper wasps, which is what she mainly works with. She's like, they're pushovers. Like, okay, they might sting you once, but then they're out of there. They're like, they're such chickens. They're going to run away really quick. And then, you know, she has all these amazing videos that get you so up close with the animal. You know, male wasps don't sting. So there's these cute little male wasps just sitting on her hand, basically massaging her fingers with their little stingers. They can't do it, you know? Yeah. And you're like, they're really beautiful. You just have to give them a chance. So I've started to tell my kids to be more patient around. We are a catch and release household now. That's been one of the transformations in the last 4 years.
Awesome.
So, yeah. Well, this was such a pleasure, Premee. I'm so glad you were able to make time to...
So glad you invited me. Thank you.
I know. I was like, who would come and talk like nerd stuff with me?
Oh no, I appeared between you. I didn't mean to be like a dividing parting of the seas, like appearing on screen. That's horrible. Normally don't put me on the side. I don't know why it put me in the middle. No, I don't like this. Now I'm gonna become awkward. But I wanted to jump on.
Real.
Now I'm going to become a Dundee and just start rolling backwards away from everyone. Also,
Watch where you're
too,
going. I can't.
I have my cat behind me, so I'm sure if I rolled on my cat, I would very quickly and painfully become aware of where I was going. I also looked up because, of course, curiosity. I looked at the tailless whip scorpions when you said that. They're so trippy looking and they're really big. And I love the thing I love the most. Yeah, how they're like these.
Yeah.
The thing I love the most about them.
My elbows are here. My hands are here.
Right? And it's pictures of all of these people with like giant, weird looking thing on their face. They're just like, they all look super, super happy. They're like, they're not dangerous at all.
Yeah, they're not. They look so weird, but they're like, we're just chilling. We're just chilling. We're tailless whip scorpions. What?
We smell like salad dressing. It's fine.
That is a skill. They should try and market that. But sorry, I get so distracted. I'm like, you could easily talk about insects and all of the awesome, cool things about them for forever. My sister used to go around like taking photos of them and everything. And it was like, oh. She was the brave one. I was about to say, Premee, she was probably after your heart as well. She was the brave one, and I was the one who was like,
No.
why are there holes in the riverbanks? And she'd be like, oh, there's spiders. And I was like, I see like 50 holes. And she'd be like, no, those are actually the snake holes. And it's like, oh, why are we here? And it's like, no, they're not pulling. So I'm like, I need to channel more of both of you in my engagement with nature. But anyways, sorry for tangential story about random animals and everything. Back to the important thing for both of your books. So I was about to say, Vanna White moment, show the beautiful cover.
Would you take a picture, a screenshot of us after? People can leave for that part, but definitely.
Yes, and I can get out of the screenshot so I'm not doing the awkward parting of the seas.
We can do that at the end.
But thank you, Rachel, so much. The butterfly effect, everyone, and then thank you, Premee, so much as well. Oh my gosh, it was such a treat getting to hear you guys talk, and I appreciate the insect animal love and representation, because insects are animals too, people, and but more importantly than the insects are the amazing heart of the people that are at both of your stories. So thank you for sharing them with us, and thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. Everyone go out and purchase these beautiful books filled with beautiful people and beautiful insects. And we will see you at the next event. Now, I can't exit us out without taking the photo. So if you wish to see this part, you can stick around, but I'm going to disappear off screen and take a photo of you guys really quickly.
Okay.
Okay. 1, 2. Oh no!
Get the book back up.
1, 2, 3. Got it.
I had taken my earbuds out, so that was awkward.
Okay, we hope that everyone out there also got their photos as well. Have a beautiful evening, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Thanks so much for coming, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.